and the global war on terror is a fraud perpetrated on all citizens of the world. And we have done it.
What articles were you holding up, please?
Okay, the first one, and this is very interesting, Dr. Jenkins, thank you, is in the Globe and Mail. And the Globe and Mail did an interview with Graham McQueen, and it was actually a very fair piece, and it was the first newspaper to report that the panel includes the honorary president of the Supreme Court of Italy. Thank you, Globe and Mail.
Translator.
The second one forced the National Post to print this fair and balanced article. And it is a very good article. It is not a hit piece. It just clearly explains the expert testimony that was presented on the first day by Kevin Ryan, Lance DeHaven Smith, and Professor Griffin.
Nice.
And please note that the author of Life Amongst the Truthers, Jonathan Kay, is also one of the editors of the National Post. I think he probably slept in that morning. Now, these articles are clear evidence that the principles of psychology that I have just been discussing do indeed work. It took one reputable, mainstream Canadian newspaper to report the details of our event that compelled others to follow suit. And we designed this event specifically to do that. We took care to make it dignified and have it proceed in a specific manner, to have a distinguished panel that will produce a final report. And it was this framing of our evidence that compelled them to finally have to report on it seriously. Now, although this is quite an historic change, it is a very shameful mark on our history as Canadians that we must go to such lengths to force our fourth estate, the press, whose primary duty it is to accurately report on the state of affairs to citizens so that they can make the most informed decisions and meet their civic responsibilities in a democratic state. Perhaps we should remind them that journalists have, in the past, been tried and convicted and punished for failing to do their job. And many more will be so prosecuted in the future for failing to expose these state crimes against democracy, which is a high crime in and of itself. At this time, I would also like to make a few other brief comments. First, in response to Jonathan Kay's sexist and erroneous assertion that women are not intelligent enough to wrestle with these deep puzzles of conspiracy, Cynthia McKinney, Barbara Honegger, and myself are right here, and we appear to be much better wrestlers with this material than Mr. Kay. In fact, I extend an invitation to Mr. Kay to wrestle with me on these issues. And in all fairness, I should probably tell Mr. Kay that I also hold a black belt. It's true. Second, for some of the men that you see here today, there are women who have supported them. I am reminded of Christina Maslach. I don't know if any of you know her. She was a graduate student and partner of one of the most well-known psychologists in the United States, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, who conducted the Stanford Prison Experiment in the 1970s. And it was Christina who compelled him to end the experiment early because he himself had become too absorbed in his role as the warden and had lost his scientific and ethical objectivity. Okay. So in conclusion, I've tried to present first a brief overview of the social psychological foundations of democracy and research suggesting how pre-existing beliefs can interfere with SCAD inquiry, specifically in relation to September 11th. And I want to end with one important quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who I opened up with. that is just imperative today and perhaps even more so than when he said it. And I'm going to quote him now. We must move past indecision to action. We must find new ways to speak for peace in Vietnam and justice throughout the developing world, a world that borders on our doors. If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. Now let us begin. Now let us rededicate ourselves to the long and bitter, but beautiful, struggle for a new world. This is the calling of the sons of God, and our brothers wait eagerly for our response. Shall we say the odds are too great? Shall we tell them the struggle is too hard? Will our message be that the forces of American life militate against their arrival as full men, and we send our deepest regrets? Or will there be another message of longing, of hope, of solidarity with their yearnings, of commitment to their cause, whatever the cost? The choice is ours, and though we might prefer it otherwise, we must choose in this crucial moment of human history. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Jenkins.
Lori, soon to be Dr. Manuel, your thoughts have provoked some complicated thoughts of my own. So I hope you'll be patient with me as I try to make them clear. The social, psychological, what shall I say, cognitive processes that you have so ably summarized, processes that keep us from being the perfect, rational, objective truth seekers and lead us to take many shortcuts and distort our efforts to find the truth, I think we would accept are really universal fallibilities in the human condition. They're not fallibilities possessed only by one group. So if I were forced to write a paper excuse me, entitled Psychological Resistance to Accepting the Official Account, I would use many of the mechanisms that you propose. I would talk about confirmation bias. I would talk about cognitive dissonance and the way it can lead to distortions of rational conclusions. I would certainly want to talk about, had I known it before, about the limbic system on the way to the visual cortex, because surely we all possess that. So we are all subject to believing is seeing as well as seeing is believing. So my complicated thought is, I don't want to suggest by this claim that we all suffer the same shortcomings, that we all proceed to seek the truth in the same way. But then it leads me to the question, how is it that we seek the truth differently, since we are all victims of this human condition, this fallibility? And I'm inclined to say that it's because, while we cannot exempt ourselves from these processes, we can, if we become aware of them, try to protect ourselves. And the best way to protect ourselves is through an appreciation and use of scientific method. I don't think there's any other way to protect ourselves from these corruptions, if you will, of a rational, reasoned process. And I offer to you